Hello, my name is Carol May Whittick, and welcome to Her Conversations, Tools for the Awakening Woman. Her is an acronym for Higher Energetic Resonance. This is an optimal state to embody in order to attract our highest desires. Who is the awakening woman? She's a woman who's seeking a greater possibility in her reality and looking for solutions. She knows being awakened is not a lofty ideal, but a necessity. If she can transform herself, she can change the world. Her conversations will introduce you to talented women who will speak to your spirituality, sensuality, and soul. They'll share their stories and explain how they are in service to the world. So let their words and these conversations embolden and inspire you. This week on Her Conversations, my guest is Stacie Graham, founder of yoga and holistic wellness company OYA Retreats. Her company has a very specific USP in that it caters solely to women of colour. Personally, I've never felt exclusion, or if there was any, paid attention to any comments or questions about my presence in mainstream yoga places. However, I now realise that my curiosity outweighed any desire for representation, which again makes me a minority. Therefore, the work that Stacie does is needed at present. This episode is for everybody. Women of colour can know that there's a safe environment for them to explore yoga and holistic offerings, and women who do not identify as such can become aware of why companies like OYA exist. During our conversation, Stacie shares instances where she felt being a woman of colour has been an issue in mainstream classes, how coming to events by OYA serves to address those issues, and why she thinks this work may never be done. So before we get into the meat of the conversation, I start by asking all of my guests, HER is an acronym for Higher Energetic Resonance. When do you feel at your most HER?
That's a good question. I think there are different moments. Definitely there are times when I'm on the mat in my favorite Iyengar class and I have an amazing teacher. And there are classes where I come out and I really recognize that I was fully present throughout. I wasn't worried about, oh, sometimes I do this so much better. Or why can't I do this today? Or what is this person doing on their mat? There are some classes where I'm just there. And then I think also I have those moments during meditation practice where the time flies and then my little timer goes off and I'm like, what? It's over? It's done? Those are really moments that I cherish, but they're not everyday meditation moments. Something that I, aspire to, but it makes me appreciate it even more when it does happen.
Okay, and can you tell some of your story? How did your life lead up to the work that you're doing today?
So I would describe, I do a lot of different things, obviously, but in particular, when it comes to OYA, how did I get there? I would say just my own ups and downs and life challenges where I found I couldn't rely on people around me. They weren't offering me the type of support that I knew that I sought or that I also needed. And so I took a break while I was working on my PhD. It wasn't a long break, but I did take a small break to go to India. I was basically almost finished and had some challenges occur with my advisor. And I was like, you know what? This is a good time to take a break. And so I went to India for several months, and it was in India where I was able to experience yoga that wasn't just about physical practice. And it was also the first place that I went where I was surrounded by teachers and students who were Black and brown. So it wasn't anything like what I was experiencing in a yoga class in Munich, Germany, which was where I was living at the time. And something, even though, it was never on my mind until I went to India and I was like, oh, yeah, this is what yoga can look like. It's not only doing these outrageous poses and being super flexible, and it's none of that actually. And when I came back, I pursued yoga in a very different way. and became maybe even a snob, um, and being very choosy about where I practice and who I'm willing to learn from. And also kind of began to follow some of the teachers that I met in India when they would travel through Europe. And in that time, I just recognized what yoga gave me, because I really was going through it with the PhD. And anyone who's done a PhD knows exactly what I'm talking about. It's just you get to this wall, and if you can somehow get through it, it's amazing. But it also sometimes you find yourself asking if it's worth it. And so while I was going through that, yoga was just my foundation that helped me not question those types of things anymore. And then when I moved to Berlin, which had a much larger Black German community, I felt like, oh, this is something that I would like to offer, but how do I do that? And so it was a long path. And then once I wound up in London again, I found myself going to yoga studios where there were few people who looked like me. And even in London, a lot of the yoga studios, they're slowly changing, but a lot of them still focus on the physical practice of yoga. And so I felt like, how can I bring myself and my service into the community that I care so much about, which is Black women and women of color. And that's kind of how we wound up with OYA.
And when did you start it? And what were the early days, like the beginnings of it?
Well, officially, it started in 2016. So we've been going for 2 years this summer. And I started by talking to a few of the Black women that I knew who were yoga teachers, body workers, to ask them, do you think this is viable? Do you think this is something that other Black and brown women want? And there was some skepticism for sure. But at the end of the day, everyone was in agreement that it's really important and it's worth trying at the very least. So that's what I did. And I have, my greater vision is much more than just offering retreats or community yoga classes. But in this first step, it has already taught me quite a bit about specifically the community here in London or in England around the long game that is creating this community. Because you have, I personally feel like there is not a sense of community as such anymore in a place like London. There's a large population of Black women, right? There's a large population of women of color. And I think there's perhaps a generational thing about taking that for granted. Just this past weekend, I went to this great exhibition on the Windrush, the so-called Windrush generation. There's a small exhibition taking place. And, there was a real sense of community there, where some of these people who are now between the ages of 60 and 90, according to one of the documents I read, they still have like their weekly meetups, and they still have their partner, and they still have these things that they do. And I can't say that necessarily exists in younger generations in that form. And even the desire to build community in that way, I'm not sure that it exists. So when I started OYA, there were a lot of people who were like, oh yes, this is amazing, and self-care. But when it came to actually committing and paying money for their own self-care, it was like, I have other priorities. There's a festival going on that weekend. Or there's a party going on that weekend.
Well, the hair needs doing.
Or the hair needs doing, So there's less of that now over the 2 years, but there is definitely a sense of there's kind of a split. There are women who are perhaps a bit older, more settled, have disposable income, who don't necessarily believe that or don't recognize that yoga is for them, or that there's something that they can benefit from coming to a holistic wellness retreat, because OYA retreats aren't only about yoga. And then on the other end, there are younger people who maybe are more familiar with yoga and holistic wellness, and, love their hashtag self-care, yet don't have necessarily the disposable income or the financial savvy to know how to save for a retreat. It's about finding a way to bridge those gaps.
And just a point that you said, and it just threw up a phrase when you were saying for some women, they're not really thinking about self-care, or they're prioritizing their finances in other ways. It's the title, the mantle of strong Black woman, and what that can mean, to the point that it's almost, you're strong to the point of negligence about yourself. Is there something that you do with your holistic treatments that will address that and actually speak to them that being strong and showing them that self-care is not a selfish act, and how it can benefit them and then also the community and who they serve?
That's a really good question. I would say that the word strong isn't something that we use too often at the retreats for that very reason, because strength isn't simply, let me make a different example. If you are weightlifting, right? And you're putting your back out or straining your knees every time you lift, no one's really going to say that you're strong, because at the end of the day, your career is going to be very short, right? I come from an athletic background. If, however, you are using the methods that you need to, and you're building over time, so that you're learning, the body is learning how to lift heavier and heavier, that's something different, right? Because then it's more sustainable. And so a lot of the time, what we're calling strong, whether it's putting up with relationships that we should be leaving, or staying in jobs that aren't serving us, it's not really strength per se. That it's something else, and it breaks us down. And I don't think that is a form of strength, where we become chronically ill, or our mental well-being suffers. So at the retreats, we rarely talk about strength as such. We do talk about resilience and strategies to move from a mentality of survival to thriving. And I think it's really important as well that how we set the tone already in the beginning, when I give the welcome, that I give a welcome message that explains, this space is yours. Move through this space in a way that serves you, that it's yours and you're sharing it with your sisters. And I think that's a start. But also, we do hear feedback where participants say, I unfortunately never hear it directly. I hear it kind of through the grapevine. But there have been participants who have come and who have said, oh, I've never been to something like this. I've never been to something that's just for us. And I didn't know that it would mean so much. So there is this space that we're able to create, and a tone that I think we get better and better at, where people come in and have the space to feel exhausted, to feel the weight of that exhaustion of whatever they're going through in their lives, whether it's physical or emotional. And it's not necessarily a negative thing, but just when you have even just 2 or 3 days to release, you release, and then new energy conduits are opened up that give you newfound energy, new direction, new insight. But in that same moment, it also shows you quite clearly, wow, all these things that I've been doing that don't serve me, all these things that I've been doing that eat up so much of my energy that I didn't think did, it becomes clear.
I like that. And you're talking about this space is yours, and why that's so important. And you say no one comes to you directly, but from your own experience, what do you think is missing in your, let me just say mainstream for now, your mainstream yoga studios that are that a woman of color is not going there, like the woman of color in the majority. Because personally, I just go in and I'm like, okay, I'm the only Black person in the room, and it doesn't really affect me that deeply, because I kind of want the information more so than wanting to feel part of the thing. But I know that for many women, if they don't see themselves represented, they won't go near it, because they just think they'll just feel that it's not for them. What are you offering that makes them feel included? What are those other spaces not offering, aside from the representation, that keeps them away?
Right. So I'll start with let's, like you said, we'll just call it mainstream. And it is. I'll start with the mainstream spaces, because it's something that I talk about, or I've been asked about quite often, right? I haven't received that much negativity. I haven't received that much confrontation about what we do at OYA, but there are people who don't understand. And one, yes, representation matters. It does matter. If you use hashtag searches on Instagram for yoga, you're not seeing a lot of us. Google is trying to get better, and in these other larger platforms, but at the end of the day, the majority of imagery that you are confronted with is not of us. That's just what it is. So first, the thought is, oh, well, this isn't for me. If you don't know anything about the origins of the practice, or for example, that there is an African yoga practice, right? There's Kemetic yoga. If you don't know anything about the South Asian and African roots of yoga, and you just look at a hashtag, then, and you're a Black woman, you're like, okay, cool, that's not me. One, or my body can't do that. Then, and I will speak in I now, because I am a certified teacher. I am a regular practitioner. And yet when I go into a studio, people look at me. I have teachers ask me if I'm in the right class if I go into an advanced class, because I have locks. I have people comment on my locks and if I will be able to do headstands. I have people say all types of things to me before I've done anything but just come into the room. Okay. And because of that, even me, and I say it that way because people assume that, if you're a teacher, you don't care. No, I'm not a teacher when I go in as a student. I'm a student. Mm. So knowing that when I go into a class, I've got all kinds of thoughts just before I've even left the house. What am I going to put on? How am I going to wear my hair? How am I going to respond? Because I want to be ready, right? I want to have that clap back in my back pocket. But depending on the day, I don't feel like saying anything. And it can affect my entire practice if I recognize that person who sees me every Saturday on the mat is staring at me, wanting to see if I can do a certain pose that we're doing in class. It affects my practice. If I let it, I can feel eyes on me for certain things. And then there is just the way people teach. I have taught workshops on making your class more inclusive. And when I teach that class, the majority of the students will be, or workshop participants will be, white, middle class, sometimes older. And they see me and they have an assumption about what I'm about to teach. Oh, she's a Black woman, so she's going to tell us about language so that we're not racist. Actually, no. I'm going to tell you a lot more than that. I'm going to explain to you words that can make someone feel uncomfortable who might be, full-bodied. I'm going to make you aware of gender pronouns. I'm going to mention the fact that not every woman has a uterus, and so on and so forth, right? So there's so many things that can happen in a yoga class that can make us feel uncomfortable. And it's beyond just seeing someone who looks like you, because you can see someone who looks like you, perhaps, and that person can or say things that make you feel uncomfortable. There's a whole, there's a whole list of things that are going on. And then first and foremost in London, there's cost. Mm-hmm. Our yoga classes cost £5. When I tell people that, they don't believe me. They've never heard of a £5 yoga class in London. The cheapest you'll get is about £7 or £8 for a community yoga or an open yoga class. But the average is actually £15. And in a city like London, where everything else already costs a lot of money, and you want someone to pay £15 for a class, how often do you think they're going to come?
I've always been a monthly subscription person, and just rinsed out the monthly subscription as well. I remember one time trying to work it out. I'm like, because for the frequency that I go,
right,
it's like I should be paying like £300-400 a month as well, because I would make that money work for me. But I totally understand it. Drop in, I don't think I've ever done a drop-in class anyway when I worked it out. But usually then still it's like £95 a month.
Sure, it's £99 a month.
Yeah.
And again, that can be difficult if you're talking to someone who, and I'm not saying all of us are, don't get me wrong, but if you think about younger people who may be studying, right? They're living hand to mouth. I know I did when I was studying. And so to make me pay £99 up front, woo.
Exactly.
You have to learn that financial savvy. Like, how do I save to make this happen? It's not easy.
And also you were talking about when you talking to women about how they would approach a student or make a student feel comfortable who has a fuller body. Black women's bodies are different, right? How do you then do you have to make adaptations to the yoga poses or the way that they kind of would sit on their hips, for instance, or just in like an easy pose or something like that to accommodate? Because it's a lot of it's about the hip area and that shape. That's where we shape very much differently. How do women have to kind of work with that?
So OYA is working with the British Wheel of Yoga, and we are delivering a yoga teacher training for Black women and women of color. And so it's great to be a tutor on that course, because sometimes the women will try to tell me something that's not true. That's because of my, that's because I have a big butt. No, boo. I have a big butt too. So I can see what's happening here, and it's not because you have a big butt. And we have a lot of fun on that course because we can talk in that way, right? But if you haven't been trained, and I'm not saying this is always the case, but if you go off and train for 30 days, those courses vary widely in how good or not good they are. And you have to have a really solid foundation in anatomy and physiology in order to be able to teach all different bodies. You have to understand how the body works. And it does help if you have seen different shapes and sizes. And what you have to learn as a teacher is, I can't just make these generalized statements about hip width distance apart. This is one of my favorite things to say. But if you have a full-figured person in your class, hip width distance might be wrong for them because that might be too wide. So you have to find different ways of explaining things. And it's important, what we emphasize on the teacher training is that you take everyone with you. So you start with the most basic form of any pose, right? And then you build from there. And then people have the opportunity to keep going or to stay where they were. Or if they try to keep going and they find, oh, I can't do that yet, then they can go back. And no one feels left behind because you're taking them on a journey. But, there are classes that I personally don't attend, but I know there are classes where they just teach you a pose. They say, this is the full expression of the pose, or this is the full pose. And that doesn't exist. I'm an Iyengar practitioner, and Mr. Iyengar always said, repose the pose. Repose the pose. And that if there was a master, he was it. And he never stopped learning. He continued to practice until he died. Repose the pose. There's no full expression of the pose. So if I have larger hips or I have tight shoulders, both are true for me, then there are certain things I'm not going to be able to do. But there are things that I can do with props or with modifications that will allow me to feel what it's like to be in that pose.
Just thinking, I'm just remembering when you're talking about the courses, the 30-day courses, not all are created equal. As someone who's traveled to the other side of the world to experience one of those, I can attest to that as well. However, there was a lot of benefit in going there as well, and then coming back and then going, okay, that's what not to do. However, you know, I get that as well.
Mm-hmm.
What, if any, kind of feedback have you had from white women in terms of about what you do and how they feel about what you're doing? Because I have been in a Facebook group, and I think there was an article, it may have been Daily Mail or something, it was all online anyway, that had actually talked about, and it was just kind of highlighting women of colour retreat.
Mm-hmm.
But then it sparks so much kind of, this isn't right, this is just as exclusive as, you know. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
how do you, what feedback have you had from that, and what would you say to that kind of view?
Sure. I have to be really honest that I have not had major backlash.
Mm-hmm.
Not the backlash that I expected. I had a few trolls on Twitter, but I don't take trolls on Twitter seriously who don't use real names, right? But what I did have was when I put our retreats on a platform, what was it? Meetup. I put it on there as well because you can reach different people and more people. And I put it up that you have to answer 2 questions in order to join the group. First question, do you identify as a woman? Second question, do you identify as Black or as of color? And so I had some very interesting people trying to sign up, answering these questions that they, you know, we are all of color. I am peach. I am pink. I am the rainbow, things like this, right? Um, and then other people telling me that I don't know what yoga is. Yoga means union, which is a part of the truth, right? And this is not union. So I've heard all of those arguments. The thing is, what's interesting about it is it's always white women. I've never had a white man. I've never had a Black man. I've never had any other group other than white women complain to me personally about what I do. There are some Black women who are in disagreement, which I've heard through other sources. But the majority of the people who confront me and tell me that this is wrong are white women. And what I find interesting about that is when they complain, they never say, why can't white men join? Why can't Black men join? Why can't brown men join? They just say, why can't I join? So then I say, well, what is it really about? You're not used to not having access. You don't actually care about our vision or our mission. You just don't like the fact that you're not gaining access to something that you feel entitled to. So that doesn't bother me. I let them sit with that because that's not my job to teach them anything. But those are the types of things I've heard that I'm creating the opposite of union. And that's not true. Let me give you one really good example. Abundant, full-bodied woman comes to a community yoga class, does a great job in those 60 minutes. And afterwards, I haven't seen her since. Afterwards, she came up to me and she said, I never had the confidence to go into a regular yoga class. This was my first yoga class. I was always scared because of my figure, that I wouldn't be able to do it or people would laugh at me or whatever. Now I feel confident that I can go in. That's why OYA exists. It's not to keep us separate forever and ever, but at a retreat, we need that space with similar points of departure in order to talk about things that we otherwise can't. When someone comes downstairs in their wig and then in the next moment comes downstairs with their natural, right? Or in the next moment comes downstairs in their headscarf. No one's asking any questions. Mm-hmm. We all know what it is. You know? That is what you need, that level of familiarity to heal. We can't heal if we have to worry about how someone else is going to try to misunderstand our words. The very first weekend retreat that we put on in 2016 was the same week that those horrible videos went viral of Alton Sterling and Philando Castile dying on camera. I was surprised, actually. I'm originally from the US, right? So I knew that I was confronted with it. But no one else was, there was one other American, but everyone else on that retreat was from England. And everybody felt the weight of those videos. And we all had tried to avoid watching them. I never watched Philando Castile's video, but the weight of what had happened was with us at that retreat, and we could talk openly about it without having to worry about white fragility or white tears. And that's where healing is possible, when you can speak freely and know that you'll be heard.
And do you think you would ever open up the room to the point where you would start to integrate, for want of a more modern word, so that white women can understand, like you're saying, just the simple thing of like what you're going to do with your hair, because it's sometimes your hair's on, sometimes your hair's off, sometimes all of these kind of things, or just to kind of understand what it is to be a black woman amongst black women, and and how the conversation differs sometimes. There are just, like you say, there are things that you would just say in the company of your sisters that you just don't
You
say.
otherwise can't say.
You just don't, yeah. Would you see a time where it would be open so that women who are curious about trying to learn to understand what it is, why your business has to exist, and what it's doing, so that there can start to be a bridge to the point where somewhere in the future mainstream will be just everyone will be walking through the door and not feeling a way about it?
So I have experienced in recent times that when I mentioned the fact that we're doing a yoga teacher training with the British Wheel of Yoga, some minds are soothed. Now, the British Wheel of Yoga is well known in England because it's the national governing body for yoga. So people are familiar with it. And when they hear that something that they respect or maybe even trained with accepts OYA and is offering a teacher training in this respect, then they think, oh, okay, well, maybe there is something to it, but we need that white authority in order to find acceptance sometimes. But to open it up, not under the OYA brand, never. And I'm putting it on the record that I'm saying never. It's not a word that I take lightly. I could imagine doing a collaboration, maybe, very intentionally, but the collaboration wouldn't be to help white women do something. That would not be the collaboration. The collaboration would be an intentional retreat together with a theme that resonates, right? But OYA Body, Mind, Spirit retreats will remain for Black women and women of color. That's what it was founded to do. And I don't think, in my personal lifetime and in my limited means as one person working with a wonderful community of healers and practitioners, I don't think that we would ever be finished, that we would ever be reaching an end state for the mission that we have.
And why do you feel that?
Because there's so much trauma and violence and it manifests in so many different forms. I don't think we'll get to a place where community and healing is just complete. Oh, we're done. No, I don't think we'll get there. Because we as humans are never complete.
I appreciate the never done, but I want there to be, maybe it won't be my lifetime, maybe it be the generation that follows, where there'll just be a little bit more closeness.
I don't deny that there may be closeness, but it's still, even if it were just one generation later, we still have generations past of trauma and continued generations of trauma. Our generation has experienced trauma in many different ways. I'm not saying all trauma looks the same, but white supremacy is very real. Patriarchy is very real. There's no way to live in this world as it is today and not be affected by white supremacy and sexism and so on and so forth. And things like misogynoir, right? those that affects Black women specifically. Anti-Black racism is such a specific type of racism. And as a Black woman, the sexism that you endure is so specific. And that's not something that heals over 5 years or in, therapy for 20 years. That's something that we carry with us from our ancestors, and that intentionally or unintentionally we pass on to others. The whole thing that you just said, strong Black woman, that's not something that we did on our own and was created in one generation.
So how can we start? How can we start to, start the journey to unpick so that it may happen in however many lifetimes? That trauma, that underlying trauma, the trauma that we don't even realize we're traumatized with as well. When you start to really unpick what it is, especially when it's, you were talking about just managing money. I think that's one of the biggest ones that kind of governs and limits the experience that women and women of color can have, is because we just have this illiteracy around money, and I think to a level a feeling of unworthiness around abundance, or unable to kind of hold and then be able to distribute it in a way that moves us forward.
Well, I believe that we have begun. We talk about things more, but there's still a desire of secrecy, and there's still a shame in speaking aloud about mental well-being or mental illness, about sexual abuse, about the abuse endured in a home that we were brought up in, and so on and so forth. There's so many areas, or, our own bad decisions as young adults, right? Who we let play us, and so on. So I don't think that, even though we're talking about it, I don't know that we're really talking about it. But I think that's the first step. I think the very first step is talking about it. But I feel like a lot of people have become complacent with that and feel like, okay, well, I've done, we've sat in a group, or we've had our panel, and we've talked about how our mothers never talked about self-care, or how our mothers cared about everyone else and didn't care for themselves. But we haven't accepted yet that they did that. And we haven't embraced where that came from. And we haven't acknowledged how we've taken on a lot of those behaviors. So I think it's a slow process, but I think it's a process of acknowledgement, real acceptance, in order to open the door for healing, and then change. If the sole purpose is to change, we won't succeed. That type of change isn't sustainable. We can't change without acceptance.
And you're saying acceptance of what's gone before, acceptance of the mistakes that we're making. Because even when you're saying allowing people to play you, that only happens when your barometer is low, and they're able to get you at a certain level. When I sit and have big thinks about what's happened in my life, and errors that I've made, and why I've gone this way and not that way, and why I'm not here when I think I should be at that point, and then just looking at the learnings, and then also understanding and appreciating, and that's taken a while for me to get to the point of just appreciating the women, because it was mainly women who raised me and what they went through in order to just do their best, which kind of got me to this point. But now that level of the generation in my family are literally, year after year, they're dying. So now that we're actually me as myself is like the generation of the matriarchy in my family, and I'm like, okay, so what am I doing? What am I leaving? What am I showing? those who are going to come to me for advice. When I'm looking at the world going, have I sorted myself out yet?
Mm-hmm.
Because I want to try and break some patterns down.
Yes.
But breaking patterns is initially appreciating that there is a pattern, and it was a pattern, and it can be broken, and then doing the work, which is, like you say, it's not going to happen with me, but maybe I can just stem the dam and just turn it a little bit, but also get rid of the anger and the frustration that, why is this happening to me? Why couldn't my life be at this point now, with all the work that I've done just to survive? Because had I have had a different starting point and have done this amount of effort, who knows? So it throws up a lot of, when I'm thinking about where I'm at and what's happening around me, and the fact that I'm at a point of responsibility that's a point I tried to shirk for a long, long time, because it just looked too heavy. It looked a lot, but yeah, it brings a lot of thought. I don't know if you've got anything to speak on that, how you feel about what the work you're doing and the legacy that you can leave.
At our last retreat in April, at the retreats, I never teach yoga, or I typically don't teach yoga. I kind of do logistics, and I support our amazing chef, and I lead the mindfulness practice. And at something just, and it's normally given to me. It's not something that is scripted. I go on the energy. And the first night is always a little difficult because everyone is just settling in and everyone's a little shy. But the second night, there's a real opportunity to go deeper because they've been doing, a whole day of work and they've gotten to know each other. And at our last retreat, in the mindfulness practice, the words that were given to me were around, you are. And that is hard to grasp. It's hard to make tangible. But that's what I work towards at these retreats, because in the US and in the UK and in much of the Western world, you are your education. You are your class. You are your race. You are your gender. You are your profession. And the accumulation of those things make you who you are. So, as I always remind people, unlearning is so much harder than learning. I love to learn. I would be a professional student if I had a trust fund to support me. I love it. But unlearning is so much harder than learning. So how do I unlearn that? Actually, no, I am. I am. And that's without judgment, right? So judgment comes in positive and negative. Again, another reminder, judgment isn't only something, oh, this is bad, this could be better. Judgment is also, this is awesome, this is positive. That's judgment too. And that's how we wind up in this whole race of, I did that wrong, I did that right. I made this amount of money, I could be making more. I dated this person too long, I didn't love myself enough. If we continue to come back to and learn to fully embody I am, then maybe, that's the moment of, some people might call it enlightenment. Maybe that's the glimpse that you get in your last moment here on earth. I'm not sure, but it's so hard in the everyday. I think we all have moments where we experience I am, but then we get sidetracked and we don't listen to our intuition. And we get sidetracked because we see something and we desire it. And we think that's where I need to be, or something tells us that's where I need to be going. And so I think with the retreats, we offer these glimpses. We create space where you have like this moment. It's almost like water running through your fingers. And you're like, oh, I want to hold on to it. But you can't. You can't hold on to it. It's just a glimpse. It's just a feeling. And then you have to find a way to bring it back into your everyday life. I am. And you do that through your practices that you make non-negotiable. Meditating, gratitude practice, moments of silence, whatever they may be, those bring you back to I am. And that's what we try to do with the retreats. Give you the opportunity, lay out different tools, allow you to experience them, these different practices, and find something that resonates with you.
Thank you for that. And I just want to ask some of the closing questions now. So the first one is, what is the best piece of advice a woman has ever given to you?
You know, I knew you were going to ask this question. And I felt it so hard. I was like, do people give me advice? They probably do, and I'm not reading it as advice. But I did remember something that has stayed with me from years ago. When I was still living in Germany, I worked with a woman, a Jewish woman from the southeastern United States who had lived in Germany and Switzerland for 40 years. And at that time, I had lived in Germany for 10 years. And I had had a really hard time experiencing racism and sexism at my first real professional job as a consultant. And I'm the type of person who, if you give me feedback, I'm running with it. And I'm like, oh, what are all the things that I did wrong? And, oh, I got this feedback. And, and I was really bad at sorting. This feedback is about this person. It's not always. Sometimes you get really great feedback. Of course, it's always about the other person, but there are people who do feedback well. But, I was in this experience of surrounded by white people who have little to no experience with Black people, little to no experience with immigrants, what have you. And the level of racism and sexism I experienced was just mind-boggling. It would never happen in the US, not because it doesn't exist, but because people would be afraid of lawsuits. Mm-hmm. And so, I'm trying to heal from this experience but take the lessons as well. And every time I would talk about something, she would say, stop. That's not you. That's, the misunderstanding between cultures, or that's this man, or that. She was always able to label it for me. Mm-hmm. And she said, you have to get back to your intuition. When you're getting feedback that can teach you something, and when you're getting feedback that is meant to break you down. And you have to trust that. When you hear it and it says, this is what it is, full stop. And that I live by that today.
It's great. It's so true. You can feel it though, can't? Same with compliments.
Yes. Absolutely.
Sometimes the words are there, and sometimes the energy doesn't match the words.
Mm-hmm.
Someone's
absolutely.
and I remember I used to live with someone, and she was going through a challenge with her weight, and desperately wanted to, and I was going to the gym every morning and everything like that. But she'd always, and it was around the time that skinny jeans were in. Uh-huh. So I was going to the gym 6-7 times a week. So I had earned the right to wear my skinny jeans. So every time I put on these skinny jeans, she'd be like, "Oh my God, you just look so skinny," and I'd just kind of be like, it didn't feel like it wasn't coming through girl, but it was never that. It was just this kind of even though the words, so it's you like you say, you always feel where someone's coming from, even if they're saying the most pretty flowery words. It's
you do know.
Yeah.
You just have to trust that.
Yeah. But it took me a while, because I was like, well, why would anyone say that to me? Because it just didn't, because I'm like, but she's saying these words, but the feeling wasn't there. So that was a learning for me with criticism, with both sides, with
Yeah.
criticism and with praise. And the next question is, which female do you think represents higher energetic resonance? Sorry.
Oh gosh, I find it it's so hard. So I'm going to do something really unexpected. I'm going to do a really stereotypical one, surprisingly, and then I'm going to do someone who nobody knows, who's probably listening. So on the one hand, and this is so unlike me because I'm not even, I am a fan, but I'm not like the fan. So right now I'm reading a great book called What I Know for Sure by Oprah Winfrey.
I think I've got
And
that one.
it's excellent. I don't even remember how I came across it, but anyway, I came across it and I was like, ooh, I need to get this from the library. And I'm so happy I did because the timing is perfect for everything she's talking about in the book. And it's fairly recent that she wrote this book. And I remember years ago when I was, or maybe like 2 years ago on Instagram, I was looking because I follow her on Instagram, and Oprah was like, no makeup, thick glasses, picking her stuff from her garden. And I was like, Oprah does not care at all anymore. Oprah is just doing Oprah. And now reading this book, I see, yeah, that's exactly what's happening. Oprah is doing Oprah. She said in the book specifically, I mean, she's older now, but in the book, she says, I'm 60 now and I've earned the right not to care anymore. I don't care what other people think of me. I don't care. And she doesn't even say it, challenging, or she just says that's what it is now. And she talks about all these different spiritual experiences and they're so simple, picking fruit and vegetables from her garden, cooking that, eating that. That was on her list. Like there were 4 separate parts in a list of just 15 of the things that she loves to do from her garden. So I feel like, of course, there's Hollywood and there's speeches and there's pomp, but I don't think that's where she is right now. I think that's what we, see, because if you get invited for a Lifetime Achievement Award on an award show, you're going to dress the part. But reading this book, I just feel like she is living a true life. She talks about, the sexual abuse, the being pregnant, and how she just let herself be dogged all of her 20s by people who weren't invested in her. And she's so honest about that. I love it. I really love the book. And I do believe that she is living her. And then on the other end is someone who's close to me in the US. And I was just in the US visiting. And she's just always doing her. Like in the many layers of saying it that way. She has her practice. She always speaks her truth around politics, around this and that. And the reason I say it's HER is because she reminds me that you can be emotional about injustices of the world and still not be attached to that. So you can be an activist. You can speak loudly about injustices and still know that that's not everything. That's not all that there is. And so that really helps me because I really get caught up on injustices and become very emotional. And seeing her reminds me I can do all of those things and still learn non-attachment.
Nice.
So those are my 2.
Cool. And mine change all the time as well, actually. Just to make it fair, I'm really enjoying Jada Pinkett Smith at the moment.
The Red Table Talk?
The Red Table Talks that she's doing with her and her mother and Willow. And I just like that whole dynamic. And it's just so great that she's got that platform. Because she always used to write quite a lot on Facebook. And then she's got that talk show and everything like that, and that she's been really open and And I don't know if you saw the one, it was a week ago with her and Gabrielle Union.
I did. I saw it.
Where they were like, I didn't like you.
But I don't know why.
Yeah, and they were just real about the fact that they had this standoff. And I think even just to kind of like deviate from that as well, I find that, and I'm trying to change it by smiling now when I see there has been in the past this standoff with Black women, especially when you walk down the street.
Yeah.
Just walking past each other has been this kind of like,
it really bothers me in London. I was telling someone about it. I was like, we don't have a Black nod here, and it kills me because I'm from the southeastern United States, even though I've lived outside of the States longer than I lived in it. I believe in the Black nod. I believe in acknowledging you and saying hi, smiling, asking how you're doing, whatever it is. And when I do that here, it's not often reciprocated. It is not often reciprocated.
It takes a moment because I'm like, okay, I'm seeing you and I'm going to smile at you. And you can see for a split second, it's like, smiling.
Right.
There's that second of like, because most of the time it's going to be the standoff, the push, or it's like checking her hair and her clothes, that kind of like 5-second checkout before you decide you're gonna where's this come from? So in my little way, I'm trying to be like, I'm gonna smile at everyone, but in particular, and especially young Black girls, because I had one step over me on the bus the other day just to get, and it was clear that she was going to get off the next stop, but she's like kind of making the moves for it, but I just kind of made my way, and she'd like push past me without even looking in my eyes. I'm like, that's a shame. That's a shame that
it is.
I'm not going to fight you. It's like, if you just say, I'm getting off, I'll be cool. Let me just swing around because I'm tall, my legs are long. It takes a moment. So, but yeah, just Jada Pinkett Smith recently is my her for now. And also just what she said with Gabrielle Union, it really, I'm like, okay, it was a good one. It was a good one. And name your favorite self-care ritual or practice. What do you have?
So I have so many. I do. I'm going to give like a typical one and then an atypical one. So like one of my favorite things is my Saturday morning, 8:30 a.m. Iyengar class that I go to. Now that I've moved, it takes me 45 minutes door to door to get there, but I'm dedicated. I leave the house at 7:30 a.m. on a Saturday. I go to this yoga class for 90 minutes. I love the class. And then I come home and make a nice lunch, and then I take a long bath. It's one of my favorite things to do when I have the Saturday, and I do often, but recently I haven't been able to. So I got back to it this past Saturday for the first time, and it was pure joy. I loved it. And then what really has been life-changing, and when I tell my clients this, because I also work as a coach, they kind of doubt me, but it is very real, and research has even shown now that it is very real. My gratitude practice. I have a daily gratitude practice. Depending on the day, I think it's important to say the gratitude out loud, to speak it. And so sometimes it's in the shower. Sometimes it's when I've just woken up and I'm still lying in bed, in those silent moments you have before you start your day. But speaking my gratitude, or even in the moment, if it's just that, when you've cooked this amazing meal and you just have to speak your gratitude for all the people who've contributed to it, from the people who made the food to the people you bought it from, to yourself for cooking it. Gratitude has just, it helps you move away from this mentality of scarcity to this acknowledgement of abundance.
That's a good one. And it's like you say, it's a real one. And when you do it, it works. So just saying thank you for everything. Yeah. Thank you. Because it's all around. So beautiful, that one. And so what's coming up for you? What's next for you?
Well, OYA is really picking up steam. We'll have our first weekend retreat outside of the UK at the end of June. in collaboration with a group in the Netherlands. So we're really excited about that. We're planning some Sunday workshops and urban retreats that will be coming up as well. And looking to collaborate more with other Black women here in the city who are doing great things. So I feel like from the OYA perspective, there's a lot of energy and a lot of enthusiasm also from the community. So I'm really looking forward to the next half a year.
Fantastic. And how can people connect with you?
Absolutely. So you can find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram with OYA Retreats with an S on the end. So it's plural, OYA Retreats. And our website is the same, www.oyaretreats.com. And email as well, contact@oyaretreats.com.
Thank you. And I just want to say thank you so much for coming and being part of Her Conversations. We've known each other for a couple of years and we've been like circling and trying to work something else out, but we're getting there. And it was really important for me to have your voice and your perspective and the work that you're doing featured here, because everyone needs to just be aware, of why it's necessary, even though sometimes it may seem counter to do it in the way that you're doing it. But I hope in listening to this, it can be a little bit more apparent why it's necessary. So I'm grateful that you took your time out of your day to be part of this today. So thank you.
And thank you for the invitation. I've enjoyed it.
Perfect.
Once again, thank you, Stacie, for joining me on this episode of Her Conversations. And thank you to you, the listener, for joining me for another episode. If you would like to find out more about me, my name is Carol May Whittick, and my website is carolmawhittick.com. I'm on Facebook under the same name, Instagram and Twitter under Casmic, that's CAZMICK. And if you'd like to be up to date with each new episode, feel free to subscribe wherever you listen, currently on Apple iTunes, Stitcher and YouTube, so that the moment a new episode is uploaded, you get an instant notification. So thank you once again for being with me, and look forward to catching up with you next week.